Hello. I took a bit of time off of doing videos, uh, trying to take care of personal life issues. Uh, took over a couple of, well, I didn't take over. I took on a couple of projects, teaching myself how to sew. I might load those videos just for the heck of it. But other than making these videos, I made a beaver fur jacket for my sweetheart. New relationship. And I also taught myself how to sew hats. So I'm trying to stay busy. Obviously, I'm struggling with the loss of my son. So I'm keeping my hands busy as much as my mind. Uh, and I want to talk today about the other side of tribal sovereignty. What can we do? Uh, I come up with a lot of problems, a lot of things that I see as needing change. Uh, and some of them are very personal, and some of them could be very harsh. I recognize talking about child abuse and stuff is a difficult subject for a lot of people to talk about. Difficult for me, thus my need for a short break. Anyways, so I'm talking about tribal sovereignty and stepping back a little bit and looking at societal things. So what could we do? In the last video, I talked about the difficulties of uh, depending on Western infrastructure to help us. So what could we do with what we have? Or what is the solution? Uh, and the solution is complex. There's societal changes that we could make, that leaders could make, and maybe I'll start there. Uh, Looking at sovereignty not as just something bestowed upon us, but something that we earn. Tribal sovereignty is central. It means that you have the right to implement your views. You have sovereign right to implement your views. And what goes on with you or your people is your right. So tribal sovereignty means the right of our people, those who are tribal, either through birth or I don't know if through choice of the people, uh, what it means and who has authority over what. But at the end of the day, tribal authority means the right to determine what we want for our people and the right to implement it. And that's tribal sovereignty. And under tribal sovereignty, with that sovereignty, we have to ask ourselves, do we have it? We have it politically. Uh, we have the right to government consultation. And for First Nations people, very few people actually recognize what a gift that is. Government to government, uh, the right to government negotiations and consultation is something that the NAACP doesn't have, the NRA doesn't have, the AMA doesn't have, uh, the Republican National Convention doesn't have, the DNC, the Democratic National Convention does not have. Uh, Nobody has it. Tribes do. So politically, secularly, worldwide, wise, we have a great authority in that. And we don't necessarily recognize it, or we aren't using it, or we aren't being allowed to use it. And one of the things that undermine tribal authority is the right to implement those choices we make. In other words, tribal sovereignty says this: any tribe has a right to restrict the sale of anything on their property and in their land, reservation, village, community to their people. And that means that any community that desires to stop drugs or alcohol in their community, they have the right to make a law that outlaws the sale of that drug. Uh, and that goes for drugs illegal or otherwise. That's to say, if a village decides to outlaw tobacco, salt, sugar, gunpowder, steel, alcohol, uh, meth, heroin, cocaine, anything, uh, interracial marriage, abortion, whatever we decide to outlaw, we have a right to outlaw it and a right to enforce those laws. Now, do we have the ability to enforce those laws? And that's where our sovereignty begins to degrade, is when we hit ability. And we've always run into this problem. Now, what can we do within the system as it sits now? That's to say, let's say that we don't want to do anything radical, like toss out the concept of Western superiority and start to look within ourselves and within our own people and start to say, what can we change as a culture? That's what can we change as a people to counter the things that we don't like. Uh, let's look at what we can do for our people without making cultural changes, without making a paradigm shift, changing our perception of what is right and what is wrong, and asking ourselves questions like, is the Western Church actually a representation of Jesus as we know him? Uh, is the justice system, the Western justice system as it operates, giving us justice as we view justice? In other words, do we as a people rejoice in our offenders going to jail and having a record, being put amongst other people who teach and learn and revel in their crimes and don't get treatment? Do we call that justice? uh, do we call it safety for our people when after someone abuses another person or the trust and the care of our communities, after they abuse that and hurt someone or cause societal damage, after they're done doing that, we interact with that person and put them in jail or whatever? Do we call that safety? And is that the safety we want? Uh, Mental health, do we think that problems arising out of our culture and out of our people and out of our families are personal problems and need to be dealt with in secret at a high cost to the individual who have mental health problems? To say, do we as a people believe that if our brother or our sister or any of our beloved people have depression, anxiety, ongoing grief, complex grief, uh, trauma history, or any of that, do we think that that person should not speak to us about it? Do we think that that person has a responsibility to go out there and find help for themselves and pay for it? Or do we think that our elders and our loving people and our chiefs and our moms and our aunties and their moms and their aunties should go out and sit down and talk to them openly about why they're feeling the way they're feeling? Barring those questions, and we say, we're not ready for that. So, what could we do? Well, barring a societal shift, a perception shift, and a decision to chase something greater than what we have and to live with what we have, then what can we do? How can we minimize the damage? Well, first off, we have to recognize that we need to start building our abilities, that we have sovereignty only so far as we have capacity. And we have to take an honest look at where we lack capacity and start to try to strengthen those weaknesses and find our strength and start to use those strengths. And I think the first place that we have to look is we have to look at what we're doing as far as our income goes, because we live in a world where money is essential. And even if we step out of the Western world or we step back from it and do our own cultural investigation, cultural look at our culture and what it's doing, and decide that we are better off changing many things that the Western people are doing. You don't cast away Jesus, you cast away a lot of the church's teachings, but you don't disrespect the church. Look at it and you find out where they made mistakes and you try to dam those up. Even if we go that route, we're still going to need to have a funding source. We're going to need a source of interacting with the rest of the world. I don't believe for a second that we should, as a people, return to the old ways of living off the land strictly. I think living off the land is wonderful and essential, but it's not what we're going to do. Not all of our people are going to do that. And our culture can't split between those who want to follow the new way and those who want to follow the old way. We need to look back at each other and respect it. We need to respect each other. And we need to use each other to support each other's mutual needs. People who choose an education need the support of the villages, the village where the power and the authority and the funding goes and originates. It comes from our villages. And our city people need a lot of support who want to go to schools or get treatment. We need material support. We need more money because this is where money costs. We need to recognize that the money needs to not stay too much. Look at when you leave, you will find other sources of funding. I know at TCC there's a big problem where if you're not in the village, you're not treated like a tribal member. You're treated like somebody else. I didn't get COVID relief funds. It all stayed in the village. None of it went to me, and that was a problem. And likewise, the people here need to recognize that we have to give back a lot of things to our tribes. We need to recognize that when we leave, we need to go and give something back to our people. And that's if we come here for an education, we need to go back and give back to our tribes. I didn't do that much in my life. I gave mostly to the city. I didn't go back to my tribe much. I have my reasons. If you watch my other videos, you'll understand that. But I need to do that. I need to give back to my tribe. And I need to know what they need. And I think a lot of what they need is for people in the city to take a greater role in keeping drugs from coming from the city and going to our tribes. We need to make sure that stuff that's coming from us, from our people, our brothers and our sisters who are living in the cities with us, we need to make sure that they're not a part of people sending drugs and alcohol and taking bad things from here to there. In other words, in the cities, there's a lot of crime and there's a lot of alcoholism and there's plenty of sexual abuse here in the city, not just within families, but at the schools and the churches and stuff where we send our kids. Those kids, they, in us, in our drinking, in our drugs, and all of that stuff, in our people, when we hear we could take a bad path, and that picks up stuff on us. And a lot of times when we're here and we see our relatives come in from the village, we want to party with them and hang out with them and show them a good time and all of that. And we send them back to the village. I think we need to recognize what we're doing to our people when we do that. And I think that we need to recognize we should work harder as city natives to make for greater village activities that are city centered, but also healthy and good, that presents to our people the goodness of the city life. And we need to work harder to make sure that drugs is not coming from our people here and going to our people there. It's the other side of the coin. It's individual choices. But it goes all the way up to the top with Tanana Chiefs Conference and Doyon in my region. I think funding behind that kind of stuff is really, really important. I think that we need to enforce rules and we need to fund people, programs to do this stuff. And we need to give authority to people to do this. Toyon and TCC, and there's countless other sources of money is available and has funding that could be directed towards a program that puts a real Alaska Native by blood, co-hired by an outfit in Fairbanks and a tribal members and the community they serve, and put that person in place to watch for drugs going to the villages. That's his job. Keep drugs and alcohol out of the village. If you're going to Alakakit and you're flying on warblows, you're going to be searched by the Alaska Native Drug Enforcement Officer without fail. And if you're caught with drugs on you, you're going to be handed over to Alaska State Troopers. And your drugs are going to be confiscated. And you could either go talk to the Alaska Native Drug Enforcement counselor about what you did, and they could start to talk to you about the dangers of sending drugs to your village. And that's not a huge outlay. It could be. It could be a huge, huge outlay. Cost millions of dollars. Or it could cost a little bit. Because one of the strengths of our people is a lot of people care about drugs and alcohol and crap going into our villages. And we just can't do anything about it because nobody funds us and nobody gives us authority. The Alaska Native Drug Enforcement Officer will be respected by other people and feared because he's backed by funding, name, authority, a title. Ray D. Wild or Tom Diddley-Bop, who really care about this stuff, would get our ass handed to us rapidly if we go out there and start trying to tell meth heads or meth dealers or meth cookers or bootleggers to stop bootlegging. And when it gets past the city and it lands in our communities, there it becomes no new problem. It becomes a problem of having to deal with your sons and your daughters, people you love, people you understand and live with, bringing drugs and alcohol to other people you love and care about who want that drugs and alcohol. And it becomes a whole different beast when it gets there. I tell you, I, I suspect for $400,000 or $500,000 a year, a small group of dedicated Alaska Native people working at the airports and other places and keeping a sharp eye out and actually going around and finding out who is dealing, visiting the villages that they're serving, searching every bag, having a tribal response, having some meaningful interactions with these people. Simple stuff. Like if you hear that somebody is in the city and they're potentially a drug dealer, call them. Hey, what's up? I just want you to know this is what I'm hearing about you from your village. When you get here, I'm going to search you. If you want to go to the village and you're caught with drugs or alcohol on you, you're going to have an issue. make the sale of alcohol either legal in the village and tax the hell out of it, or authorize people to stop the sale of alcohol. If you want to have alcohol in your village, go ahead, but you can't sell it. That's a stickier one. I would say any community that allows drugs and alcohol into their community are going to have to face those issues. And let them face it and back them up on it, what they want to do. I would say you don't want cops in your village. In my family, if you go to call the cops on another family member, your family has broke and your family needs to be repaired. Because when you have to call an outside power source, you're throwing your sovereignty away. You have to call the cops on a family member, your family has lost sovereignty. That's what it means. I don't like cops in my family. I wouldn't want cops in my village. And if I did have a cop in my village, not be a cop. Hire a dad and hire a mom. Hire uncles and aunties, moms and dads. Don't hire cops. I don't know how much it would cost to fund something like that. I would say this, it would have to be independent of a lot of Western funding, because Western funding comes with all kinds of strings attached. It has to be independent of the VPSO program, at least the VPSO program funding, because, well, so far, the VPSO program is funded by federal law enforcement monies, and it hasn't been able to do that. And it's never been able to implement that. It's too close to the Alaska State Troopers. It's too close to Western law enforcement. It requires the enforcement of Alaska state laws, which we don't necessarily want to enforce. For example, I cannot see myself simultaneously enforcing a law that stops bootlegging, a major source of income for a man, and also enforcing hunting laws when he goes out to hunt for his food. I cannot see myself enforcing those laws. It would make my drug enforcement activities arrogant and self righteous. And it would add to that arrogance and worse damage to tell them they can't hunt. That's why we don't want to be too close to Western law enforcement. Those monies are tied up one and the same. I don't want to be seen ever, and I don't think that we want to have cops chasing our tribal people and watching our tribal people. We want people who care to interact with our people. And we don't do this as volunteers, and we've got to recognize that. You can't ask me to volunteer my time and my safety without your authority. Facebook likes and oh yeahs and good jobs doesn't suffice. And neither I nor anyone could volunteer to do this work. And we depend far too much on volunteering. I'll say this: those men and women who played the role of mothers and fathers to our people, and that's to say, those men and women who enforced social control, who made sure things didn't get too far out of hand, they never got paid. But those people didn't also have to hunt and teach and do everything else. We didn't get paid, but we were looked out for. It's that way for hunters. It's that way for people who teach dance classes. If you want a dance class and you want to do native dancing in your village, guess what? It's a low paid job or it's a volunteer position. And we can't afford to do that. It's not a living. And if you don't fund it, ain't nobody going to do it. Our people who taught our people to dance are good dancers, and those who carried on traditions and, and cared about their people, they were helped, they were supported, and that's what it took. The chief couldn't be the medicine man and the hunter and everything else. We underfund these things, and that's by design, I believe. And any program that we do needs to be able to tap into funding that's free of federal and state strings so that we could have true self-determination. It's not pie in the sky to say that a tribes could not have meaningful change. I think there's a great need in our cities to assist our people in really meaningful ways to adjust from village life to city life and vice versa. We don't want to send our tribal members back to our villages broke and hurt. And we don't want to bring our tribal people here and have them try to go to college and all of their friends and everything. There's so much opportunity for wandering. To come up with real ways to accomplish that. Decide that maybe we want to start funding native mental health practices. And they say there's a lot of funding for that. I hate to say this, there's no funding for Alaska Native ideas. Now, I'll say there's a lot of Alaska Native people and programs, but I'm going to say at the universities, what are those programs dependent on? Federal funding. And what does federal funding say? National best practices. What is national best practices? Whatever works the best according to Western culture. And that's what's funded. That's very problematic because the national best practices is not developed in tribal country. It's developed in Western universities and Western practices. And that's not a shot at Western practices. That's just saying it's not working and it's where it comes from. And if our funding requires us to follow Western practices developed by Western people for Western people without really taking into consideration tribal issues, then I'm either following the wrong trail, the Western trail, or I'm believing that the Western trail is the best trail. I'm giving up my sovereignty. We need to stop and ask, what do our tribal people need when they get here? What is needed? But I'm reaching 40 minutes. I'll talk more about mental health and what I think we need as a people and what we could build for our people. I think a native developed program that specifically targets issues like a police force that deals specifically with drugs and alcohol and does it our way, a way that works for our people, I think it won't be as expensive as we think. And maybe it's just a shot in the dark. It's just a shot in the dark anyway, because what we're doing hasn't really been working. And it's not working because we keep trying to do things their way and still be living our way. Makes for split people. God bless.